Hi, Shay Russell here, editor of the Daily Reckoning Australia. And today I want to talk to you about an opportunity for investors that I think might be being overlooked, probably because it's a little bit boring. Now, the 5G network is currently being rolled out across Australia, and there's a lot of hype around it and how it's going to change how Australians access the internet. The thing is that a lot of Australians don't realise is that we get less than 1% of our internet access or connectivity from satellites. Now, 99% of our internet access actually comes from subsea cabling. Now, I want you to think of subsea cabling like the electricity cabling in your walls. We don't actually think about it being there, and the only time we notice that it's gone is when it's not working. Well, that's the same with subsea cabling. Subsea cabling is basically the world's internet laying on the ocean floor, and they run from country to country, and essentially they're the physical tie-down point for, all the countries around the world. Now, there's 378 subsea cables in operation today, and Australia has just 9 cables that link us to the rest of the world, which, when you think about our position as a developed economy and a major exporter, that's really not a lot. The other thing too, because we've got so few subsea cables connecting us to the rest of the world, it does leave us in a very vulnerable position if they break down. Now, a lot of people seem to assume that, don't worry, if the subsea cables break down, that satellites will be able to just pick up the internet transmission. That's simply not the case. The satellites transfer data at around 1,000 megabytes per second, whereas the subsea cables do it at about 1 terabyte per second. So the subsea cables are significantly important to Australia's economy. So when one of them is cut by accidental damage, like say by a ship's anchor or a natural weather event, or even a shark nibbling on them, for example, which they do, it actually has a flow-on effect by reducing Australia's internet speeds that we all feel. Now, in other countries around the world, they simply overcome a subsea cable damage simply by transferring their internet access to another subsea cable, as well as taking advantage of overland cable access. Now, that's great for all the other continents in the world that are joined together. That's not so good for Australia's, because our overland cables basically just connect Australia to Australia. So there's no new data transfer coming in. Now, the other thing too, and why I think this is a pressing time for Australians to look at the opportunities ahead in subsea cabling, is subsea cables generally have a minimum lifespan of 25 years. Now, a lot of our subsea cables, or the majority of them, were laid in the late 90s to early 2000s, which means over the next 5 years, we're going to start to see some of the existing cables be decommissioned. So that will mean that there will be companies bidding on either replacing them or coming up with a new type of technology for these subsea cables to connect Australia to the rest of the world. Furthermore, the Australian government gave a hint last year that the subsea cables were becoming more important to Australia as a national security measure. Late last year, Australia announced that they would not allow Chinese-owned firm Huawei to create a subsea cable landing point in Australia. And furthermore, Australia has committed somewhere between $90 million to $200 million to build a subsea cable from the Solomon Islands to Australia, and a subsea cable from Papua New Guinea to Australia as well. So this is basically Australia sort of reinforcing that those underground cables are quite important, and that they do ensure that we have a seamless internet connectivity. What you need to remember as well is that without these subsea cables, there is no transfer of information coming out or going into Australia. Think about cloud-based storage, for example. Most businesses do use cloud services to store information. However, those cloud storage sites aren't always necessarily in Australia. In fact, if you do have a cloud storage site based in another country, then that company or your company relies on those subsea cables to be operational in order to access that information. As I said, it's a little bit of a boring idea, but subsea cabling is crucial for the Aussie economy. That's all from me today. I'll be back next week with more.